I'd like to quickly trace a shift that takes place from the Bible's understanding of tzara'at to that of the rabbis. And I think that will have something to say about a shift that has taken place and is taking place in our understanding of mental illness as well. So in the Bible, if someone is infected with tzara'at, the tzarua, then everyone has to keep away. But tzarua asher bo hanega begadav yufrumim, someone who gets infected, his clothes will be torn, rosho yefarua, his hair will be disheveled, val safam yateh, has to cover up his lip, but tamei yikra, he has to cry out, unclean, unclean. It's clear that in the time of the Bible, and Rashi supports this reading, it's clear that in the time of the Bible, people thought that tzara'at was infectious, and the tamei is to keep people away. So at a time when tzara'at was considered to be something that was dangerous for other people, it made sense for people to be kept clear. The pure and the impure were not meant to mingle with each other, and it was the responsibility of the person who was ill to call out and to warn other people of his presence. The rabbis had a radically different understanding of what tzara'at was, and they certainly didn't think that tzara'at was infectious. They thought of it as some kind of psycho-spiritual problem, or maybe even a moral problem, and they didn't want people to run away. They didn't see it as something that could be passed on from one person to another. But they're left with the biblical verses, and they do an astonishing thing with the biblical verses, and a beautiful thing. They take that verse in Leviticus, and they reread it in a very sensitive way. Tamei yikra, this is in the Talmud Masechet Sota. He cries out, Tamei, tzarich lehodia tzaro l'rabim. He needs to make known his suffering to the community. V'rabim mevakshim alav rachamim. And the community is obliged to seek mercy for him, to look after him and pray on his behalf maybe. But the tamei, the unclean, that the tzarua is obliged to call out, that's in the Bible, you can't do anything with that. But it changes from being a warning, please run away, there's someone infectious coming, to a call for help. Run towards me, I'm suffering, I'm having a terrible time. It's a call for compassion and not for fear. And the Talmud derives a general principle from that. Kol mi she'erabo davai, anyone who's something bad has happened to, tzarich leodir l'rabim, she is obliged to make that known to the community. V'rabim mevakshim alav rachamim, and the community is obliged to seek mercy on their behalf. So once the community is tuned into the idea of tzara'at not being infectious, it's not dangerous, then the responsibility falls on the community to care for the person who is suffering and to move towards them as opposed to away from them. That's a major reframing, but it's also it's a beautiful idea that as your conception of illness shifts, and as you move away from a sense of fear, then you also have to reframe. You have to reframe your sources. You have to reframe the traditions on which illness is based, your understanding of illness, and you have to call on people to approach the people who are suffering with compassion as opposed to condemnation. There's a kind of mutual obligation that's set up. If the individual who's suffering knows that the response of the community will be one of compassion as opposed to one of condemnation, then there can be an obligation on the part of the sufferer to say, Tamei, I'm suffering, in the sure knowledge that the community will move towards them in compassion. The parallels to mental illness, I think, are clear and don't need to be spelled out. That as our conception of mental illness shifts, and as our understanding of it moves away from condemnation and fear, then we have to reframe our relationship with the sufferer. And ideally, I think, in the way that the rabbis understand it, the sufferer does articulate their suffering in public. They do get a chance, in the midst of a warm and caring community, to articulate what they're going through, in the sure knowledge that the community, when they hear tameh tameh, when they hear that the person is suffering, will run towards them, as opposed to away from them.